Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources you share with us, no matter how brief or how extensive, and really just extract the hidden architecture,
hmm
the insights, the arguments, the core nuggets of knowledge that truly matter.
We strip them down.
We do. We strip them down so you walk away truly well informed, and often you get to bypass hours and hours of reading.
And usually that means we're sifting through, hundreds of pages of research or maybe dense economic papers, sprawling historical narratives.
Right.
Today, however, we have a unique challenge. Our source material is astonishingly minimal.
It really is.
We have only the title and the subtitle of a historical excerpt.
That's right. Our entire universe of analysis for this deep dive is a single line: The Tragedy of the Donner Party, a journey into hell.
That's it.
And that's it. We have no dates, no geographical facts, no casualty counts, nothing. No primary source quotes. We only have the frame.
In that framing, the narrative scaffolding provided by just these 11 words it's everything.
Everything.
When the specific facts are deliberately withheld, the language that's used to introduce the story, that establishes the tone, it sets the historical memory, and it dictates the reader's expectation from the get-go.
Okay.
So our mission today is pure semantic and narrative analysis. How do these few powerful words instantly establish a complete high-stakes narrative arc before you even consume the first paragraph?
Okay, let's unpack this then. We are dealing with language that is, it's not just descriptive, right? It's overtly dramatic. It's heavily metaphorical.
Absolutely.
So what does this title immediately assume we already know about the events, and what specific kind of story is it promising to tell us?
Well, we have to begin with the main title, The Tragedy of the Donner Party. This phrase, it seems really simple, but it locks the historical event into a very specific category of public memory.
A category. Okay.
We have three components that really define the author's intent: the very literary construct tragedy, and then the historically significant label party.
And this analysis of just 3 words is crucial because, for the learner, for you listening, this is your first point of contact. This is the elevator pitch for the entire event.
Exactly. Let's start with the smallest word, which is the.
Okay.
In everyday speech, it's forgettable, right? But in titling, particularly for history, it carries this massive weight of authority.
So if I titled a book, say, A Disaster on the Trail, that would imply, one unfortunate event among many experienced by pioneers.
One of many.
But calling it The Tragedy of the Donner Party, that immediately raises the stakes.
Absolutely. By deploying the word the author is implying this is the one, the essential capital T tragedy associated with this group.
The definitive one.
It is. It eliminates ambiguity and it demands singular attention. It suggests that while other groups may have faced hardship and other events might have been unfortunate, this one stands alone in its magnitude and its significance.
It's not just reporting an unfortunate incident, it's presenting a historical thesis statement.
That's a great way to put it.
It's basically saying, this is the canonical story of the Donner Party, and its definition is suffering.
Yes.
This instantly gives the event a level of, unique, almost epical importance compared to the countless other hardships faced during westward expansion.
And consider the implication of authority here. When we use the, we're suggesting a consensus, a fixed narrative in the historical consciousness. Think about similar historical markers: the Great Depression, the Civil War, the Holocaust. We don't say a Civil War or a Holocaust.
No, you're right.
These definite articles, they transform events into defining historical monuments.
That distinction is incredibly important for you, the learner. If you see you are being signaled that you're receiving the definitive, the most famous, the most universally agreed upon narrative. It acts as a historical designation, not just a descriptive phrase.
And this designation, it restricts the interpretive scope. Once you label something the tragedy, it becomes very difficult for other historians to explore alternative perspectives.
Yeah.
We'll say the triumphs of the early stages of the journey, or the incredible resilience of the rescuers, without relating them all back to this designated, inescapable, tragic outcome. The tragedy becomes the lens through which every other fact about the Donner Party has to be filtered.
So it implies that the essential identity of the Donner Party is just. It's inextricably linked to this single definitive moment of catastrophe.
Yes.
It sets the event apart from the mundane chronology of migration. It elevates the suffering to a historical cornerstone.
Exactly. It's no longer just an event in a sequence. It is the sequence.
Now we move to the centerpiece of that main title, tragedy. And as analysts, we have to treat this word not just as a synonym for sadness, right?
Absolutely not.
We have to treat it as a specific, powerful literary construct.
Precisely. The term tragedy is highly specific. It's steeped in classical and literary traditions. When you apply it to a real historical event, you're imposing a narrative structure that goes way beyond mere bad luck.
You're calling back to the Aristotelian definitions here, aren't you?
I am.
It implies an inevitable, dramatic descent. It's not just that bad things happen, it implies a failure that's rooted in the subject itself.
Exactly. Classical tragedy necessitates an element of hamartia,
Hamartia, okay.
which is often translated as a fatal flaw or an irreparable miscalculation that leads to disaster.
A fatal flaw.
And the suffering is often viewed as inevitable or even earned through some inherent deficiency or an irreversible choice made by the protagonist, or in this case, the collective protagonist.
Wait, I have to challenge that application for a second. If we label a historical event a tragedy, isn't that fundamentally unfair to the settlers?
How so?
It sounds like we are shifting the blame for the broader institutional failures of that era, poor mapping, inadequate infrastructure, onto the individual character flaw of the Donner family or the group.
That is the essential critical question this framing forces us to ask. And the author is certainly imposing that judgment. By calling it a tragedy, all the preceding events, the planning, the ambition, the decision to migrate, the choice to take that shortcut, like the Hastings cutoff.
Which we only know about from outside knowledge, not from the title.
Exactly. But the framework is there. All those decisions are immediately framed not as rational, if risky, frontier decisions, but as fatal flaws. They become the setup for the inevitable doom.
So the title suggests that their fate wasn't just an unfortunate random circumstance like an early unexpected blizzard, but that it was a direct consequence of a specific identifiable hubris or error in judgment that doomed them from the very start.
It signals disaster as the inevitable outcome. This classification creates an immediate emotional contract with the reader.
An emotional contract. I like that.
It says, prepare for profound loss and pathos. The use of tragedy is emotive and it's judgmental. It elevates the narrative from a mere factual account, say, a history of overland migration in 1846, to a moral instruction or a cautionary tale.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. The emotional expectation. If we look at literary tragedy, the audience is supposed to experience catharsis.
Right,
Which is a sort of purification through the emotions of pity and fear. So by framing the history this way, the author is telling us how to feel about the events.
Yes.
It ensures the focus remains squarely on the catastrophic end, and it overshadows any preceding triumphs or even just the mundane historical details.
And the word tragedy ensures the story is easily absorbed into the broader cultural consciousness as this myth of profound human failure and testing. It focuses the historical memory strictly on the dissolution of human systems under duress, driven by a fated descent.
Okay, so that's the and tragedy. What about the last part?
Our final component of the main title is the identifier, the Donner Party. We have to analyze the historical setting implied by the name itself, specifically that term, party.
Party. In this context, it's clearly not a celebration. It refers to a collective group or an organized body of people, typically for travel or migration or even military purposes like a wagon party or an expeditionary party.
And that detail is fundamental. Party implies collective organization. It implies shared resources, a reliance on leadership.
Which we assume is the Donners, just from the name.
We assume it's centered around the titular Donner family, yes.
Yeah.
And critically, it implies a shared intention toward a common goal. They set out as a cohesive unit.
This immediately places them within that massive historical backdrop of American expansion and manifest destiny, even though we have no specific dates or locations in our sources.
Exactly.
We are filling in these huge historical gaps just based on name recognition paired with the term tragedy.
And let's consider what party signals socially and economically, especially in the context of 1840s westward travel. Let's contrast it with other terms.
Yep.
If the title had used the Donner Expedition, for example, that might imply something more scientific, maybe, or an official government undertaking.
Right, more formal. Or if it were the Donner Company, that would suggest a purely commercial venture, a business.
Of a business, exactly. But party often suggests a more familial, civilian, and cooperative venture. It suggests pooling resources among semi-independent families. It suggests community.
It emphasizes the human element.
Precisely. The social contract they entered into to ensure mutual survival. And the synthesis of tragedy and party is just devastating.
Why?
Because it suggests that this very structure, the thing designed to ensure survival and cohesion, became the vehicle for their collective doom. The failure wasn't just an individual death, it was the failure of the community organization itself.
So the narrative implication is that the very bonds of cooperation and shared identity, which are implied by the word party, were tested to their absolute fatal limit.
Yes.
It shifts the focus from simple individual mishaps to the psychological, moral, and physical dissolution of a structured community under extreme duress.
And the naming convention, attaching the disaster directly to the leader's name, it means that the historical identity of the Donner Party becomes inextricably linked to the tragedy.
Their name is forever synonymous with suffering.
It is. This collective naming emphasizes the shared nature of the catastrophe, and it deepens the dramatic impact by ensuring the reader anticipates not just death, but the complete breakdown of civil society.
Wow. Okay, so the analysis of the main title is complete. The singular, definitive, inevitable doom of the organized collective.
That's the argument it makes.
Okay, so if the main title, The Tragedy of the Donner Party, serves as the definitive historical and literary classification, the subtitle, A Journey into Hell, that functions as the immediate emotional engine.
Yes, exactly.
It takes that abstract concept of inevitable tragedy and makes it graphic, visceral, and morally extreme.
This is where we get into the rhetorical power of metaphor. The subtitle is marketing, it's narrative control, and it's a literary promise all rolled into 5 words. It tells us that this historical event wasn't just a failure. It was a complete, terrifying reversal of its intended purpose, and it resulted in unimaginable moral and physical breakdown.
Let's start with the first word, journey. That immediately establishes movement and intention.
Right.
A journey implies a planned, purposeful movement with a destination in mind. It has connotations of hope, of self-improvement, transformation for the better, a pilgrimage, a quest, a migration toward a promised land.
And what's fascinating here is how the subtitle insists that this purposeful movement fundamentally went wrong. The goal was California, success, a new beginning.
Right.
The destination they achieved, according to this subtitle, was hell. This signals a catastrophic deviation from a hopeful trajectory to a disastrous one. It makes the failure seem profoundly ironic and poignant.
If the title were, say, Trapped in the Snows of Disaster, that would suggest a static, passive state.
A waiting game.
Waiting for rescue. But A Journey into Hell emphasizes the process of suffering. It paints the experience as a prolonged, active struggle where they were continually, actively moving toward their catastrophic fate.
That framing captures the irony that their efforts, their forward momentum, their decision to keep going, the very definition of their hopeful, pioneering spirit, only served to deepen their predicament.
So every weary step, every mile they covered, paradoxically took them closer to this metaphorical landscape of hell.
Yes, this also gives the story a built-in narrative drive. We are following a linear progression from A to B, where B is doom. This structural element compels the reader to witness the unfolding events, structuring the account not just as a list of facts, but as a narrative of a horrifying descent.
The emphasis on the journey also highlights human agency, doesn't it? The choices they made.
It does.
They chose to set out. They chose to continue, even against setbacks. And this powerfully reinforces that tragedy narrative we were just analyzing.
It does. It suggests that their inherent drive and agency are what led them down the path of inevitability. The title insists that the suffering was dynamic and continuous, which dramatically heightens the sense of dread and prolonged horror.
Okay, so now for the word that does the heaviest lifting in terms of dramatic resonance, hell.
Yes.
This is not just a metaphor for discomfort. This is the ultimate literary and religious metaphor for profound, unendurable suffering, for total moral testing and irreversible, absolute doom.
And the choice of this specific extreme metaphor is vital, because it places the event far outside the bounds of normal human hardship.
Right.
It goes beyond simple disaster. It isn't merely a prolonged storm or a tragedy caused by bad luck. Hell suggests a total breakdown of human norms, of morality, of physical limits. It implies a place where the ordinary rules of civilization and even nature just cease to apply.
It immediately introduces a highly charged moral and psychological dimension. In most cultural contexts, hell is a place of deserved punishment or extreme trial or absolute separation. Applying this to a historical event suggests that what happened was so terrible that only a supernatural or mythical metaphor can capture its scope.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, titles that use this kind of extreme language They serve to sensationalize and simplify complex historical moments into an instant moral lesson.
They position the event as an almost mythical crucible.
They do. The author is using powerful preloaded imagery, Dantean perhaps, to ensure instant, profound, dramatic resonance. It completely bypasses the need for any dry historical context.
The impact on you, the listener, is instantaneous engagement. This framing ensures that the event is incredibly sticky in the public memory. The reader is primed for the extremes of survival. If it's hell, the reader expects to encounter descriptions of deprivation, death, and, critically, the moral degradation, the unspeakable acts that must have occurred for anyone to survive.
It sets the highest possible bar for extremity without even mentioning the details.
Right.
And the use of hell mythologizes the suffering. It transforms the historical figures into architects pioneers struggling against an overwhelming existential force of calamity.
And this is why the story endures.
I think so. It's no longer just a history of migration failure. It's an epic of ultimate human testing against absolute doom. The memory is guaranteed.
Okay, so this is where the synthesis of the subtitle creates that maximum rhetorical tension. The phrase links dynamic, intentional, hopeful travel, the journey, with a state of static, eternal, absolute suffering, hell.
Yes.
That semantic clash is incredibly potent. It fuels the dramatic core of the narrative.
And it immediately raises an important question for any analytical reader. How does this rhetorical framing manage the tension between human agency, their choice to embark and keep going, and the environmental or situational inevitability, the hell they encountered?
That conflict is the narrative thesis.
It is. The contradiction is profound. A journey implies progress away from a bad state and toward a good one.
Right.
This title suggests the opposite. Progress toward ultimate catastrophe. They weren't just trapped by circumstance, they were actively traveling deeper into their entrapment.
Turning their every effort into a step toward doom. That amplifies the psychological horror immensely.
It suggests that the disaster wasn't a sudden accident, but a slow, horrifying realization that the destination they were seeking was not the promised land of California, but a landscape of moral and physical annihilation.
Their physical movement, which was supposed to secure their future, ironically betrayed their initial hope.
And became the very means of their destruction.
This tension between the two concepts is what captures the psychological toll of the narrative. Every step they took on that journey was an act of hope and will.
Yes.
Yet the title insists every single step was a descent into a state of absolute doom. The reader is primed to feel that constant internal conflict between the sheer human will to survive and the relentless, crushing reality of their environment.
So the subtitle, therefore, it functions as a devastating rhetorical twist of fate. It completely perverts the fundamental human desire for progress and destination. The journey is meant to transcend, but here, it tragically leads to the destination itself being the punishment, defining the ultimate moral and physical collapse.
Okay. So we've spent a considerable amount of time deconstructing just 11 words. We've identified the power of the definite article, the classical weight of tragedy, the extreme metaphor of journey into hell. Now, we need to synthesize this. What's the practical impact? How do titles like this shape historical understanding, particularly for you, the learner, who is seeking quick, thorough comprehension?
Well, this title is not passive description. It is active prescription. It forces a certain interpretation.
Right.
And we have to acknowledge that for the learner, in a world that is saturated with information, this title acts as an indispensable, if biased, narrative shortcut.
A biased shortcut.
The combined title and subtitle instantly telegraph the story's complete emotional and thematic scope. The tragedy implies inevitability, failure, and pathos.
Okay.
Donner Party implies collective organization and a shared fate. And Journey into Hell guarantees desperation, severe physical hardship, and moral extremity.
For the learner, this acts as a narrative shortcut of unparalleled efficiency. It tells them instantly, this is a story dominated by suffering, by moral collapse, and by human endurance.
Exactly. The focus is strictly internal on the individuals and their failure, not on external factors like government policy or international relations or political changes.
You don't need to know the specific dates, the exact route, or the names of the rescuers. The title provides the immediate emotional, moral, and historical context you need to just jump into the narrative.
It's a guaranteed emotional investment. The scope is immediately confined to human endurance and its ultimate limitations.
And crucially, it sets the level of required detail. We know, because of the use of hell, that the account will necessarily dive into the darkest aspects of survival.
The cannibalism.
The cannibalism, the interpersonal conflicts, the psychological breakdown. The title guarantees high stakes and extreme descriptive content.
And this level of dramatic framing ensures that the event is eternally memorable. A title focused on, say, historical logistics might fade from memory.
Right, Migration Patterns of 1846.
Exactly. But the tragedy of the Donner Party, A Journey into Hell, is sticky, it's impactful, and it's easily recalled.
It instantly links the historical incident to archetypal, universally understood stories of human trial, which is highly effective for cementing historical memory across generations.
So it provides the immediate takeaway. Disaster of the highest order, rooted in human choices and resulting in moral extremity. It primes the reader to seek out the most sensational details within the text, ensuring those are the facts that stick.
But while we recognize the efficacy of this dramatic language, we also have to acknowledge its inherent bias, don't we?
We must. As analysts, we recognize that the author chose rhetoric over neutrality. We have to discuss the consequence of that choice.
The crucial balance here is for you, the reader, to recognize the bias that's inherent in the framing and consciously separate the descriptive facts from the rhetorical overlay.
Yes.
How does a reader move past the sensationalism to extract a more nuanced historical narrative?
The sophisticated reader has to always ask, what are the underlying verifiable facts that justify the use of terms like tragedy and hell? We recognize that the author is maximizing emotional impact, perhaps at the expense of nuance, or perhaps simplifying complex variables into a single, compelling storyline.
The danger of this dramatic framing is that it simplifies complex historical decisions, like the calculated risk of taking a new route into these clear-cut cases of hubris or unavoidable doom.
And that simplification potentially obscures other significant factors that were at play.
Such as?
The inadequacy of frontier mapping at the time, the institutional failings of organized migration, or the environmental conditions which were genuinely exceptional.
So this title essentially functions as a moral commentary. It suggests a clear lesson inherent in the disaster.
And it discourages inquiry into systemic or environmental factors by focusing so heavily on the individual party's failure. The historian acts less like a chronicler and more like a moral instructor.
So what does this all mean for us as learners? The exercise of reading just the title forces us to recognize that the packaging of history significantly influences our perception of the events contained within.
The title is the fundamental filter.
It is. It's the filter through which all subsequent information is received. If the title is dramatic, the facts will be processed dramatically, regardless of the historian's actual fidelity to the details. It compels us to always question the framing before we accept the facts.
It's just fascinating how much we can deduce and analyze from so little text. We've defined the entire narrative arc, the emotional stakes, and the author's intent, all from those 11 highly charged words. The moment you decide to use the tragedy instead of the calamity or the disaster, you have made a powerful, irreversible argument about the meaning of that historical event.
That brings us to the close of our deep dive into the language of historical tragedy. We uncovered the power of the definite article "the," which claimed singular authoritative significance for the event. We examined the literary implications of tragedy, ensuring the story is read as an inevitable, cautionary fall rooted in potential human flaw.
And we dissected the narrative force of the journey into hell metaphor, which guarantees psychological and moral extremity alongside physical suffering, fueling the story's enduring resonance.
The central takeaway is this. The title of any historical account is fundamentally an argument disguised as a label.
It is. It tells you not just what happened, but how the author wants you to feel about it, and how they intend for that event to be classified in the permanent annals of memory.
And this analysis prepares you to approach the full source material with a critical eye, always identifying the bias embedded in its very introduction.
That's the goal.
Thank you for sharing your sources and joining us on this unusually concentrated deep dive. It proves that sometimes the shortest text provides the richest material for analytical exploration.
It certainly does. We leave you with one final thought to mull over. If history is always read by survivors, how does the title "The Tragedy of the Donner Party" suggest that the true historical power and enduring narrative lies not in the actual resilience of those who survived the journey, but rather in the compelling dramatic story crafted about those who, in the eyes of the author, became victims of inevitable doom? Think about authorship, narrative control, and perspective.